After all these years, nearly 10 years of struggling to push IBM through to its rightful fruition, it has taken far longer than what I expected back in March of 1998 when I put together an implementation of IDMs and demonstrated it subsequently through the IFWP later in that year, precursor of ICANN. And of course, nobody took any notice about that. And I'm really glad that ICANN today is taking serious attention about this whole thing about IDMs. And I just want to remind everybody why is it that I'm so passionately involved in IDMs, because let me illustrate by an example. I'm a professor in the university. I look after the student hall of residence in the evenings, where I have 500 students. And one of the projects they do as part of the student project is an expedition to Cambodia. These are Singaporean students from National University that go out every year to Cambodia to teach students in a little village in Preveng, outside of Phnom Penh. These kids don't learn English when they start out. They speak in Khmer. My good friend Norbert Klein just tells me that finally the government has adopted a standardized keyboard system, computerized mechanisms for people in Cambodia to type Khmer. And so my students are going to these schools and basically trying to help them bridge that digital divide. Till today, they cannot key in Khmer, they cannot read Khmer language websites unless they actually master the Latin character set or the ASCII set or the LDH that is so familiar to us. It's totally transparent to us, but to these people, it's a real thing. It is a real impediment that causes and perpetuates this digital divide. So the reason why I like to bring to this forum is that if this issue of keeping the core neutral can help accelerate the process of introducing new IDMs, then I'm all for it. Will thin networks work better or thick networks? I don't know, really. And probably all of us wouldn't know unless you have some special foresight into the future. But I'm willing to try if it will work out, because I've tried almost everything else in the last 10 years to get IDMs too. Ram mentioned real harm. Real harm that is done to the system if we take necessarily hasty steps going forward. I would posit that that statement should be rephrased as real harm done to the haves. Never mind the have-nots who are struggling out there, the millions of the have-nots out there that are being left out of this digital revolution that's transforming the world in this 21st century. And here we have a bunch of students of mine going out to Cambodia to help these young kids out there bridge that digital divide, because these are the citizens of the future. They need to have the tools. They need to reduce the barriers, the access barriers, to help them become citizens of the digital era. The longer we keep them away, it's going to bite back at us. The world has become so small and so flat, as Thomas Friedman has mentioned, that we can pretend that we are discussing real harm in isolation of the haves and totally ignore the have-nots, but it will come back and bite back at us. And therefore it is totally in our interest that we seriously address this issue of the have-nots out there, where serious harm and real harm is constantly being inflicted, because the longer they stay out of this, stay on the other side of the digital have-nots, that harm will eventually get to us. So if keeping the core neutral to this process will help us achieve this goal of bridging that digital divide, then I'm certainly all for it. I'd now like to come to the next point that I'd like to make, and the points that were stated about how to keep the system stable, because the internet infrastructure has become such a public good that we have a serious responsibility to keep it stable and secure. going forward. And I fully subscribe to all the points that Ram mentioned earlier, that we have to take the responsible way forward and not to hastily introduce anything that does real harm. Well, we all know that the more complex, we know intuitively that the more complex we make the situation, the more parameters that we have to control for, the more complex the situation becomes in terms of controlling the thing. And we can't try to pretend that we can be God and cover all corners, cover all angles. So it comes to the old age-old formula of KISS, keep it simple, silly. Can we keep the system secure and stable, and yet at the same time keep it as simple as possible without having to magnify the complexity of the whole process? So far as you can see, the ICANN process to any newcomer is getting pretty complicated. Right? We are tying ourselves into a lot of knots because we want to play God and try to make sure that everything is safe, secure, and stable going forward, and that it does no real harm. Well, not exactly. No real harm to the haves, never mind the have-nots. Maybe keeping it thinner, keeping it simpler, may well help us achieve our goals of making the internet for everyone, everywhere. This is the investment we are making for our children and our children's children. And it's worth this effort, and I thank all of you here in the audience that are spending their lunch hour to actually come in here and seriously talk about how we can keep the core neutral. If that could be a way, whether it's for free speech or for helping create a more democratic process, whereby the have-nots have a real democratic chance of surviving in the future of the digital revolution.